Welcome back to the Center in the City podcast. I'm your host, Wade Brill, and I am so glad you are here. I want you to know I just hit record and tears are already in my eyes because this episode is so emotional and there's so many things that I want to share about creating this book. And I just can't wait to share it with you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already purchased your copy, you can do so at wadebrill.com/book bonuses or check out the show notes for the link. So today I want to share with you some behind the scenes, like where the inspiration for this book came from, my process, all of the fun inner critics that I dealt with, the external critics, the just how I've sifted through the noise to get to this point. And let me tell you, it's been 10 years in the making. So it feels very surreal to be holding my book in my hand and to be knowing that each of you get to hold this book in your hand. I hope you are listening to this episode while you're on a walk or doing something that brings you joy. And I feel honored to be brought along. And let's settle in and let's get centered. So, my book, 100 Mindful Moments to Balance and Energize, this book was created over a decade ago, and I have been letting it sit and seep and simmer in my Google Docs for over a decade. I have always been called to write a book. I never thought I would be a writer. Growing up, I was diagnosed as being dyslexic. And some tears come to my eyes as I share this with you because there is so much shame still, and that I have had to process and continue to process around being dyslexic and feeling like I can be a writer and that I can express myself and that it's okay to misspell things, or it's okay to have grammatical imperfections, and it's okay to be creative in this format that I've been told in the past is not necessarily the best format for my self-expression. Yet I remember having so many teachers and tutors who gave me confidence, who gave me the support, who gave me the skills of how to keep writing and to how to work and strengthen this muscle. Because even if you're not dyslexic, writing is still really challenging, and it is a practice to be a good writer. So all this to say is that writing was never on my radar as a child. However, when life started to get really complicated at a young age, my parents got divorced when I was about 9. My mother was diagnosed with leukemia when I was about 9, 10. And that started this world rupture of life is unstable, it's dynamic, it's uncertain. And at a very young age, I had to learn how to navigate it. And journaling became my best friend through this process to help me navigate and process what I was feeling and thinking and start to put words to my emotions and give me some clarity on what was going on. When it was my turn to be diagnosed with cancer at the age of 21, I leaned on my journal hardcore. Every day I was writing. And this even intensified about 2 months later when I suddenly lost my mother to her own cancer battle. I leaned into my journal to be my best friend, to talk to me, to learn how to meet my intense emotions and grief and heartache, and to find some solace. I remember a family friend saying to me, like, write down everything, be as detailed as you can, capture your thoughts, capture your experiences. Maybe one day you'll want to look back at this and this will feel really fruitful or helpful for you. Now, once I got healthy and well, and my mind was then set on getting me back down to Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I was when I was diagnosed with cancer in 2010, I had this urge to write. I wanted to tell my story as a cancer survivor and somebody who was thriving, somebody who took the most shitty, horrible situation of going through chemo and at the same time losing my mother, and sharing these stories of how I was able to care for myself, how I was able to dig deep and build resiliency so that I could keep showing up for my life, so that I could keep showing up for other people's lives and try to make this world a better place. So when I moved to Argentina, that was in the back of my mind, like, I am going to write this story. And I didn't really know where to begin, to be honest, because I still felt so in it. Like, even though I had gotten a clear bill of health, even though I was back in my happy place, there was still so much uncertainty of, is the cancer going to come back? What am I really doing with my life? Do I have enough distance to have perspective on what I've gone through? All of this kind of spiraled and clouded me from being able to fully write. My favorite books that I was reading during this period of my life, and still are to this day, were mindfulness books, were books like John Kabat-Zinn's books, Diana Winston's books that were about mindfulness and this ability for us to be with our thoughts, be with our emotions. And it helped me feel more calm. It helped me feel seen for what was happening in my internal landscape, helped give me language. And it inspired me to also find purpose, to know that I am on this path in life to help people care for their inner landscape, care for themselves from the inside out. And knowing that when we can do that, how much better we feel, how much more in alignment we feel, how much more full our tanks feel of energy, that we're then able to serve and care for others in this world. So about 2015, after living in Argentina again and meeting my husband, and we moved back to Seattle, and I was going to coaching school, and I was deepening my meditation practice and my meditation teaching practices, and all these things were developing. I was teaching Pilates and building community here in Seattle. I started to write 100 mindful moments to balance and energize. I had this conversation with somebody in a mastermind group around, maybe the way that I need to express what's present for me isn't in a traditional book or memoir. And the deep desire to write came from this place of wanting to support others. I wanted to support other people feeling seen, feeling resourced. This was, in the earlier days of Instagram, there weren't reels, there were photos. It wasn't really about, here are all of the tips and tricks. And I wanted somebody to be able to have something that they could hold and reflect on, that could inspire their well-being. So I allowed myself to just brainstorm all of these different ways that I took care of myself during my shitstorm, during this life rupture that really took the ground away from me, and how I found ground within me, how I found this inner stability to keep showing up. And I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and we were talking about the idea of mothering oneself. And I said, you know what? I feel like that's what this book is. It's how I mothered myself, how I cared for myself during a time where I didn't have my mother, and during a time where I really needed my mother, and when I was really young and had to learn these skills in a really hard moment in my life. So I wrote a lot of this book in 2015, and I attempted to have somebody design it, and they designed it, and it felt okay. It felt a little kitschy. I didn't really know what I wanted this book to look like or feel like fully yet. I had conversations with a few publishers, and then I remember connecting with a hybrid publisher, and this was, again, early on in the days where self-publishing wasn't prominent. And there was momentum, and then I'd get some feedback, and some feedback was helpful and some of it maybe wasn't. And then I would get brave and share my book with some family, friends, and try to get their thoughts and their feedback. And nothing really landed. I feel like nobody really saw my vision for this book. And my book just stayed in my Google Docs. So over the last decade, I would come back to this book again and again, and each time thinking, okay, maybe if I do it this way, or if I tweak it this way, or maybe I turn this book into a deck of cards and let people pick their item of self-care from the deck of cards. Maybe it's not meant to be an actual book. And then a few years ago, I hired a book coach and we started working on a different idea. And I just was kind of ready to let this book die, so to say. Let it be just in my Google Docs, let it be there for whatever was going to happen. I didn't need to worry about touching it. I just could let it go and focus on this other project. And I tried to do that. I really did. But something happened where I had this deep realization a few years ago that I felt I was abandoning myself. I let all of these external voices and all of these internal voices of fear keep me paralyzed and keep my creativity and my self-expression really stuck. And I was waiting for somebody, what I noticed specifically was that I was waiting for somebody on the outside to tell me it was good enough to press publish. I was letting somebody on the outside tell me its worth versus allowing myself to trust my inner expression, trust myself, and just play with this project. Like, why do I have to make it so serious? Why can't it just be a tool, a resource that goes out in the world? And if it helps at least one person, then it is worth it, knowing it's going to help hundreds of thousands. But just even if it helps one, that it feels worth it. I started working with a different coach, a creativity coach. And part of that process, we worked together for about a year, was not only getting back into just the practice of writing and practice in self-expression and doing the artist way and building trust with my creative voice again and my inner little girls and letting them play and feel heard and seen. And I also met those places inside of me that I reflected on earlier where the dyslexic shame still can flare up. And that's a part of me that I have learned how to love and how to meet with a lot of kindness, because she gets so sensitive when she gets feedback that something was misspelled or that the sentence was off. Like it just burns her deeply. And to just know that it's okay and to feel like she can still express herself without feeling the constraints of perfectionism has been something that I've really been playing with her and letting her feel seen. Let me tell you, each stage of this book creation and publishing process feels so vulnerable because it feels like a new part and piece of me is getting seen. And it's not just getting seen in one dimension, it just feels so alive. And even though I feel very vulnerable on my podcast and I feel very vulnerable in some of my writings, whether it's Substack or in my Wait a Minute newsletter, it feels so different to publish this book in this way. I knew I needed to publish this book when I'm trying to figure out the timeline. I think it was about maybe a year ago before I fully committed to, yep, I just need to get this out of me. I was in that practice of healing from that place of where I felt I abandoned myself. And I came back to this framework and I said, okay, Wade, like this is an opportunity for you to use this framework that you've created, the mindful hand of self-care, and really think about how you can care for yourself right now. How you can care for yourself right now so that you feel more full, you feel more capable to then keep showing up and serving your community, the world, your family, your clients, your loved ones. And so I leaned on these 100 mindful moments and used this book to help me feel more connected to myself, to help me come back to myself. That's really where I regained the confidence of this is needed. This isn't just me adding noise to the world. This is needed. This framework is needed. And if these mindful moments, these 100 mindful moments can spark some insight and empowerment for people to care for themselves, then they also need this, because we all need this. At the end of last year, I was saying to myself, okay, this is my Q4 goal. I'm going to find a designer who's just going to help me create this book as a download PDF, and I'm just going to get out in the world. However, once I started going down that path, I recognized this is more than just a downloadable PDF that sits on your computer screen. Like, this needs to be something that people can hold and carry and have with them on hand. Now, for those of you who follow along with creating what I call power intention for the year, a word, a theme that's your guide, mine for 2025 was courage. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to use my word, my power intention, to help me move through all of this fear with love, to help me get through all of these vulnerable moments that come up, these moments that want to keep me small and safe, and to be able to move through it with love. So this book started to take on its own life form, and I worked with a different designer on getting a really beautiful, easy paperback that people could hold and have in their purse, have by their nightstand, have with them, that felt like a homecoming. Nothing about this publishing process is or was done in a way that people tell you to do it. I didn't follow the map. I didn't follow the guidelines. I just went for it. And in one way, that made it a little bit more challenging. In another way, it also just helped me keep taking one step forward at a time. So for those listening that also deal with letting go of perfectionism and really focus on progress over perfectionism, it was just as like, who cares? Who cares? We just need to get this book out there in the world. What was a huge motivating factor for me was not only my word of the year, courage, this power intention to help move through all of the discomfort, to do hard, uncomfortable things, but was also this promise to myself that I knew I wanted to get this book out there in some way, shape, or form. And so keeping that promise to myself, even if it took 10 years, but following through was so important to me, to build that trust, to build that sense of I matter to myself. I can honor my own wishes and desires was so important. I knew deep down that I had to birth this book before I could do another big creative writing project. And so this being released into the ethos feels like such a gift. It also feels very vulnerable. It feels like my heart is super exposed, and that feels really beautiful in one sense because I feel connected to the world. I feel connected to all of you. And it also feels very vulnerable because there's no armor here. And I'm really just allowing my heart to be shared and shine without this filter of, well, is it good enough? Or what are other people going to think? Or you can only share if you get praise or accolades. Like, I am just sharing. I'm sharing because it's my truth. I'm sharing because it comes from a place of service. And we'll see what happens. The other day, I was writing some email pitches for the book, and I felt this choice point of like, I can make this process feel really serious because that's what I've done for a decade, or I can start to just have fun with it. And life is meant to be, it's not always fun. It's not always rainbow and sunshines and unicorns, but there's a choice that I can have more joy and lightness with this. And I've heard from so many readers so far that even just the framework of learning about the mindful hand of self care feels so helpful for them to just think about on a daily basis like, how am I giving to myself? Thinking about the hand, touching the heart. How am I giving to myself fully, holistically, so that I can give to others? And even if that's the only nugget people walk away from this book with, I'm so grateful. I am so grateful that they have this framework that they can lean on, even just a little bit to help them. This framework that's in the book, 100 Mindful Moments to Balance and Energize, is also the basis of my Summer of Self-Care group coaching program. And I remember years ago when I did this program for about 5 years, how helpful it was for people to again look down at their hands and see the symbol of how they can care for themselves and keep caring for others. One of my mentors who's published a few books, I remember her sharing years ago when I believe it was her third book that came out, and she just was like, you know what, it's so interesting. Every book has its own soul. It takes on its own journey, and one of the beautiful things about books is that it's a object. It's something you can hold. And so you might find a book in your local little stationary, libraries on the street. You might find a book that somebody left on a plane. You might find a book in a bookstore, in a used bookstore, on a friend's bookshelf, right? Books become these objects that we can find ourselves in. I see this book really being people's guide, it being a place that people can come back to again and again, a space to add your own mindful moments, a place to collect your own wisdom, and a place to remind yourself of, oh, yeah, I can care for myself. Sometimes life can get so busy and loud that we think we're doing all the things, but we can get into this mindset of, I'm checking things off of a box. I'm checking things off of a list. Coming back to this framework and asking yourself, what do you need in this moment? And then picking a mindful moment that supports that need. I think it's going to be so helpful for people to get out of analysis paralysis. Like, what should I do for myself? What do I need? And instead, you're going to see something within this framework and within these 100 mindful moments that spark, oh, yeah, that could be really helpful for me right now. Let me try that. And to notice then, what does that feel like afterwards, after you practice that? And there's these journal prompts to support you in not only the creation of that practice, but also in the reflection of that practice. There tends to be 3 categories that people spend the most time in, and you're typically you're dominant in one. You might do them all, but you typically have a favorite spot. And so that might be you're a learner, you're somebody who loves to learn, absorb information. Maybe you're somebody who goes in the second category of you're somebody who's always in the doing of it. You're always in the action of the implementing. And then the third category is the reflection, pausing to reflect, is this helpful? Is this serving me? Is this meeting my needs? Is this working well? What could be working better? And all three, we need all three, but we tend to hang out in one. So maybe you're somebody who, again, just loves to absorb information, but you're not actually putting it into practice. Or maybe you're somebody who loves to be in the doing, but don't reflect on what you're doing to say, is this serving me? Is this helpful? Is this worth it? Or maybe you're somebody who just loves to be in the reflection and gets lost there instead of putting in the action or in the absorbing more information, right? So we tend to have our comfort zones within this dynamic, but the book is set up so that you have all three here. You have wisdom and insight to absorb. You have the action of doing, and then you have the action of reflecting. Is this helpful? What could be more adjusted to make it even more supportive? So this 3-pronged approach really helps take these mindful moments, these practices, and helps you integrate them into your unique life in a way that's going to serve you best. So, this isn't a book that I encourage people to read front to back as fast as you can. Instead, it's about slowly simmering with it, about reaching for it when you need it, about turning towards it when you notice you could use more support for how to care, how to restore your batteries because you're feeling depleted, burnt out, overwhelmed, needing some tending to. I'm in conversation with a client the other day around how she wanted to feel more energized in life. And that's one of the reasons I call this book 100 Mindful Moments to Balance and Energize, because that's what I hear a lot from people is we want to feel balanced. We want to feel equanimous in life, and we want to feel energized, joyful, like in alignment, flow. And all of those things, what I've noticed over a decade of coaching is that it also has to deal with, are we leaking our energy? Is our energy going out to the world? Are we letting all of it get drained by the world? Because a lot of us are. And instead, how can we give that energy to ourself, not from a selfish perspective, but give it to ourselves first so that we can fully feel alive and present and engaged. And that supports us showing up more powerfully and purposefully in our life. I am witnessing it within myself these days of, wow, me coming back to this framework has really helped me take care of me instead of allowing my controlling tendency to want to control or take care of others or try to fix situations or try to make things perfect in spaces, and instead focus on me and how I can show up to the situation, how I can care and tend for myself, my needs. And that has created just such powerful shifts in my relationships, with my work, with trusting the world, with just allowing there to be more flow in life. Now, what's also really fun are the book bonuses. So if you purchase the book now, you get access to these book bonuses. And part of the book bonus includes a private podcast feed that has a few different guided meditations, each one for the chapters and the framework of the mindful hand of self-care. And those are powerful guided meditations to support you thinking about how you can practice your mindful moments. I'm really excited because as this book is birthed in the world, I'm going to start to do some events and some pop-up little mini kind of book tour events in New York, in Chicago, in LA, in Seattle. And so if you are listening to this and want to join or collaborate or be a part of it, feel free to message me. I'll link a way to contact me in the show notes, because I would love for more of the community come offline and come together in person and really bring this work to life. I will also share in the show notes previous podcast episode I've done that's talked about creating the book and my process of starting and stopping writing, and how I really focus on creating more of a morning ritual process in making writing more consistent than it has been. And now it's really helpful. I have a Substack called Noticings. It's a free Substack if you'd like to join. I'll link it also in the show notes, where I aim to publish something once a week. And it is a place for me to practice just writing and sharing what I'm noticing in the moment, whatever theme is coming up for myself. And this is a practice in self-expression, but also putting down the critic, putting down that filter that wants to over edit or keep me small, or that activates the place of dyslexic shame that can come up. So this has been a space where I've also been really stretching into just writing for writing's sake, and knowing that writing is such a helpful tool to be a human connector in this world. One of the things I'm really walking away from this experience, like my own self development, healing experience from publishing this book, is that creation is a life force. And as humans, we naturally want to be creating, and creating is separate from doing. Creating, we're in this place of expression without limits, without restrictions, without necessarily needing to have an end goal. We are creating for creation's sake. We're creating for self, for spirit, for a larger purpose, even just be for the purpose of play, which is also really beautiful and powerful. It doesn't have to be this like huge almighty mission, but creation, it's like I want to be creating. And when I let myself be limited by creation, when I limit my creative expression because of the fear, because of the self-doubt, because of the inner critics, I am squishing a life force within me. And why would I want to do that? So that has been a huge, powerful reframe of giving myself permission to play more, create more, express more, and let go of the internal dialogues of fear or critics or external critics that might enter the picture. So, as we bring this episode to a close, I welcome you to reflect and ask yourself what has been yearning inside of you to be created. And hopefully, you've gained some insight or inspiration of your own to keep creating, to keep sharing your creative gifts with the world. Even if you feel like your story has been done before, why would I need to write it or share it again? You have to remember, this is something that's really helped me, that your unique lens of how you're going to share that story is going to connect with somebody else. They're going to hear something, maybe they've heard it before, but they're going to hear something for the 10th time, but they're going to hear it slightly different. And that different way is going to resonate with them. And so we have to remind ourselves as creators that we can create. Thanks for being here. As always, it is such an honor and a gift to enter your ears, your mind, your heart. All of the ways to stay connected or ways to order the book or check out the Summer of Self-Care group coaching program will be linked in the show notes. As always, I love hearing from you about what your takeaways are from this episode. So feel free to reach out on Instagram at OneWade or send me a note. Also, a huge thank you to everybody along the journey who has supported me and this book getting to where it is. I want to thank Jenny Blake, who has always inspired me to write a book and that writing is possible. I want to thank Travis Hellstrom for being my first point of contact to think, yeah, creating a small tips book is possible. It's out there in the world. I want to thank Nancy Morgan for editing an early version of this, as well as supporting me with the Mindful Hand of Self-Care framework. I want to thank Letitia Mooney for being an editor, a thought partner, my creative coach who just inspired me to get this out there. I want to thank my beautiful friend, Alex Katz, for inspiring me to invest in this book and to hire a proper designer. I want to thank Tom Moss for being the amazing designer that he is and for being a thought partner in this. We thought this project was going to take us like 6 weeks and it took us over 5-7 months. I want to thank my husband for always believing in me, and he has been the person who over the last decade has been like, what about your book? What about your book? What about your book? And continuing to inspire me to get it out there. I dedicated this book to my loving mother because I know her spirit is with me as I was writing and creating this book. And even as this book is out there in the world, that her inspiration for giving me these foundational insights can continue to live on. And a huge thank you to each one of you who's listening to this podcast, who ordered the book, who's in my community, who shared the book, who continues to share the book, who's written a review on Amazon for the book. You all mean the world to me, and I'm so grateful for your support as well as your ability to also believe in this work and to continue to care for yourself and care for each other. As a reminder that it does take a village. And so thank you for all being the village to help bring this book to life. Until next time, stay centered.